What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and to another Outriders video. A while back, a member of my Discord community, Deuce Wiggly, reached out to me and said, I've got a build that I want you to look at. It's got a relative low barrier of entry, it's not firepower based, so you don't have to worry about hitting crit spots or anything like that. It's not glass cannony, in fact it's actually quite tanky. It's a debuff build, but really deals a lot of damage even if you are playing in trios. And my response to that was, what? So today we're going to be looking at this build and exactly how it all comes together. Now, if you like the video or you find it useful in any way, please do consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, maybe sharing the video with a buddy. It really does help the brand grow and it just means a whole bunch to me. Without any further ado, let's jump right in. So what we have with this build is the merging of two very powerful different kinds of Pyromancer. We have the volcanic rounds reload boost meta, which is quite prevalent with Pyromancer right now, and speedruns. And then we have the debuff side of Pyromancer, which leans heavily into thermal bombs with branded on. Now essentially when you bring these two together, what you're left with is a character that is able to push out large amounts of anomaly damage, but doesn't necessarily need to stack firepower or anomaly power to get to it. Almost all of your big damage is coming from the cycling of Moaning Winds and Radiation Splash and the additional damage that you get from those two mods once you apply that damage to something that has been affected by branded. Now this is a very efficient build in terms of moving through maps because of the way how you can clear trash very efficiently, and the built-in CC that you have with using something like Ash Blast. So as mentioned, this build isn't really concerned with stacking firepower and anomaly power because that's not where your damage comes from. So you can actually stack health on all of your gear pieces, and that is where the general tankiness of the build comes from. That is probably one of the biggest compliments that I can give the build as well, just because of this fact. It allows you to transition so easily between solo and group play, where you can then essentially become the tank of the group and soak up all the damage in the front lines while dropping these debuffs on which your teammates can benefit from, and you also dropping these massive reload bombs on people through employing Moaning Winds and Radiation Splash. I had a lot of fun with the build in the days as I was preparing the footage for this video and testing the build, and I actually just want to thank Deuce Wiggly a lot for sharing this with me, sharing it with us, because it certainly for me is a break in the standard way in which I play Pyromancer. I main Pyromancer, so generally speaking that is usually the class that I'm running, whether I'm playing solo or whether I'm carrying people or playing in groups. And since I usually play Ash Blast Overheat Pyromancer, this is a nice break in that, and certainly a very fun character to farm with, simply due to the fact that it is so stable and chunky and very durable. So you don't really have to worry about, you know, going down to some weird combination of skills, anything like that, and you can essentially just move your way through the map, you know, going room by room and just locking down stuff with Ash Blast, making sure that you get your reload on, and then essentially just cycling your weapons on these enemies as you move through. So when we get to the actual build itself, let me highlight first, as I've said, the health pool is ridiculously large here at nearly 50k HP with a standard 50k of armor as well. So extremely chunky, fat, tanky little character. And then as mentioned, we see that the firepower and the anomaly power are not exceptionally high. Now the weapons that we're using on this build are Funeral Pyre, of course, with Shadow Comet and Claymore Torrent on it. This is essentially a massive AoE clearing machine, especially when it's powered up by reload boost, because all of these mods on this gun produce anomaly damage, and so therefore just deals a whole crap ton of anomaly AoE damage to everything. And then as mentioned, your reloading mechanism here is Moaning Winds and Radiation Splash, which by itself, without actually being increased by anything, deals almost 1,000,000 damage flat. So once this is actually increased by all of the other mods and all of the other additive damage bonuses that you get from this class, it actually starts pushing out quite a lot of damage. Now last but not least, I do have a pistol on here with kinetic stomp and clip combustion. I don't actually ever cycle onto the pistol, I mostly just cycle between these two guns, but that's basically the pistol that I always carry on the class. Now when we go over to the actual gear, again, we're not using any legendary sets, we're using 5 pieces of purple gear, and the substats on all of these pieces of gear are max health, status power, and cooldown reduction. And the reason why we want this is, as I've mentioned, firepower and anomaly power don't really mean anything to us because we get all of our damage from anomaly damage, which comes from the weapons. So we take max health so we can get as much survivability as possible. We take status power because we want our ashen boost. We want our ashen boost to be available as long as possible, but more specifically what I mean is we want, when we ash enemies, for them to stay in ash as long as possible, and that is of course enhanced by the more status power that you have. Last but not least, we want super fast cooldown reduction because we want access to as many bombs as possible, because branded combined with thermal bomb is where we also get a massive amount of additional damage from. Now, when we look at the first mods that we're using on here, we're using Fire Frenzy because we want 2 sets of thermal bombs that we can use, and we're using Death Sentence because we want our weapon damage and anomaly damage against enemies that are affected by Ash Blast to be increased by 40% and 30% respectively for 8 seconds. Then on the chest piece, we have Reload Boost, and this is the Volcanic Rounds Reload Boost mechanic. This means that when you have Volcanic Rounds on and you lose rounds or swap to another weapon, this buff comes into play, and this increases your anomaly damage by 50%. Now, this is the only buff of its kind in the game as far as I'm aware. Everything else that affects anomaly usually increases anomaly power. This is different. This increases the damage, and this is why it benefits all of those mods on your weapons as well. Now, we also use double fun on here, which means that our thermal bomb can affect 2 targets at once. So when you press thermal bomb once, the bomb essentially splits and you can hit 2 enemies at once. And since we're using frenzy at the top, it means that we can apply 4 thermal bombs to 4 different enemies. Now, on our pants, we are using Captain Hunter because we want to be dealing as much as possible damage to elites and captains. Trash die like trash to this build, so the only thing that stands up to us a little bit are the elites and captains, and this will make us deal more damage to them. Then we have Ashen Boost on here because we are ashing enemies, and so this helps us deal additional damage to those enemies that are ashed. Then when we get over to the gloves, we are using Ash Increase Range because by default, Ash Blast ranges, it's not terrible, but this actually makes it reach almost across the entire map. Now, bear in mind, when you hit Ash Blast, it moves out like a ripple, so it's not like Overheat, which immediately hits everything in the back row. This will actually ripple out from you like a wave and affect enemies, moving out. We also use Branded on here. This is the main debuff of the build itself, and this makes enemies that are affected by Thermal Bomb take 40% more damage. Now, with 2 applications of this, you can essentially stack 80% more damage onto an enemy if you put 2 thermal bombs onto them, and this is often used on bosses, captains, or elites if they somehow survive the first volley. Now, lastly, on the boots, we're using Lasting Fire and Bullet Kindling. Now, Lasting Fire just simply increases the amount of time that a thermal bomb can be inside a person until you kill him and it explodes. So this increases it by 3 seconds. This helps you to just be able to put these thermal bombs onto captains and elites and give you a little bit more time to actually drop them so that you get the thermal bomb to go off. Bullet Kindling is just like Ashen Boost, and this just allows us to deal more damage against enemies that are burning. Now, by default, enemies, when you are fighting them, they're either going to be ashed or they're going to be burning, one of the 2. So usually this is just to help you just further on deal more damage to these enemies. Now, when we get over to the skills themselves, as you can see, Volcanic Rounds is of course here because we want to employ that reload mechanic, the reload boost mechanic. Then we're using Thermal Bomb as mentioned, and last but not least, we're also using Ash Blast. Now, because we're stacking so much cooldown reduction, we get an extremely low Thermal Bomb at 6.4 seconds. And as well, we get a very low Ash Blast at 8.6 seconds. Now, when we go over to the class tree itself, this is, and my face is kind of like in the way there, so what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to take that away so we can see that last node. But basically what you're looking at here is we're going just down into the bottom here to get a little bit of cooldown reduction, also going over here to get Wildfire, so we get this cooldown reduction as well. But then predominantly we're staying in the top tree and we're picking up as much weapon damage as possible. Now, this just further on again accentuates the damage that you get from those mods on your weapons, because weapon damage in the top tree here buffs up that damage as well. So again, when we are employing this reload mechanism, or when we're shooting guys with Shadow Combat, everything like that, that is considered weapon damage, and this is buffing up that damage. So we're going top tree all the way around here. We do pick up Ashes to Ashes, which says that every time something is ashed, They are also vulnerable, which just makes them take even more damage. And as we go along here, we're of course picking up, whenever we can, something like, you know, more damage to enemies that are ashed, anything like that. Last but not least, we do also get hurt twice as long. This increases our damage to elites by 10%, but makes them deal less damage to us. And we do pick up these two nodes here. This is more damage to ash, and this is essentially more cooldown reduction. So all in all, you can see that this kind of like builds itself as if it is a bullet build, but that's simply because we want all of these additional firepower nodes so that it enhances our weapon damage. Now that's it for the build and the video, guys. Let me know in the comments down below if you've tried this out, what you would change about it, what you like about it, or more specifically, if you have any suggestions on how to make it even more sexier. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me.